Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with George Ryan, who's one of our consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider Talk Cyber. So today we're looking at ransomware and how organisations can protect themselves against it. So to start us off, George, can you describe exactly what ransomware is and why it seems to be so heavily featured in the news?
Yeah, so it's one of those that gets thrown around a lot without any real kind of description of what it is. Essentially, it is software with a malicious purpose, hence malware, to hold your data at ransom, which makes it then become ransomware. So the idea of the ransomware is that this is going to keep your data unavailable to you, such as through encryption, unless certain demands are met. So usually that would be the case that you pay some money and then they provide the decryption key and you get your data back. What we're seeing in a lot of cases now actually is there's also the threat to just leak the data. So it's kind of extending beyond just holding your data at ransom to, well, actually, if you don't pay, we're going to publish this on the web for everyone to see. And we have seen in some cases that they'll threaten to go straight to your regulator just to get you fined. So probably the reason it features in the news so much at the moment is just the heavy kind of impact of it. So obviously with ransomware compared to other malicious softwares, the damage can just be so huge just in terms of financial, your credibility, just ability to perform day-to-day functions. I'm sure if we open up the news today, we'll see there's been something recently. And I think equally, this is one that's hitting organizations in every sector of every size, really. And I think that alone kind of puts it in its own kind of territory of newsworthy. You can see some websites and you're thinking, oh, what are they coming up for in cybersecurity today? And you're like, oh, ransomware. And, it's such niche kind of companies that you just never put two and two together. So, it makes for easy clicks as well in that sense.
Perfect. Thank you, George. So who is responsible for protecting an organisation against ransomware?
Yeah, so essentially everyone in your organization will have a responsibility. This is obviously going to differ. Your head of cybersecurity is going to have more than just a standard employee as such. But because people, one of the areas in which you can be attacked, everyone to an extent who is using technology in your organization has some form of responsibility, such as not to just click on random links, not to try and download files from suspicious websites, etc. You have kind of three key areas we like to focus on, which is your people, which obviously is this one we're on about at the moment, as well as your processes and technology.
People, processes and technology. What exactly is that and what does it have to do with ransomware?
Yeah, so like mentioned just a few seconds ago, these are the kind of the three key areas in which you can be hit with ransomware, which also means there are three key areas where you can look to bolster up your defenses. So obviously you have your people, you have defenses in terms of ransomware, such as your training and awareness. So teaching people good cybersecurity hygiene, making them aware of, what ransomware is, the impact it can have on the organization, teaching them about phishing, because that's one of the entry points from ransomware, and, their kind of responsibilities to the organization. You also have your processes. So, this can be like how you do things. So, your policy for information security, your password policies to make sure you have strong passwords, how you communicate, how you report, standard procedures for dealing with emails. For example, not calling back on the number in the email, but the number that you know as the company, for example. And then you have your technology. So this is the other things you have in place, such as your firewalls, whether you're splitting up your networks, performing analyses of vulnerabilities in your environment, making sure not everyone has maximum privileges. And it's kind of all three of these that you can use kind of holistically to strengthen your defense to ransomware. And, this can be the one way they might try and get ransomware is to get through your user account. And it's like, well, we have multi-factor authentication. That makes it a bit harder for them. They might try to send a phishing email, and well, our staff has been trained and our phishing procedure is this. They're not going to fall for that. That's another way you can look to kind of defend yourself from ransomware as such.
Perfect. Thank you, George. So I know there's a lot of measures that you could put in place as an organization to protect against ransomware. But if you were to start from a blank canvas, an organization with nothing in place, what are the first things you'd like to see implemented?
Yes, I think really, if you look and take ransomware as something that it's always going to be more of a when than an if it happens, taking that approach is going to kind of help you out a lot more. So on that, one of the things I'd be looking at is, well, one of the biggest impacts we have is our data loss. We potentially can't do anything without our data here. So, okay, maybe let's look at having some kind of backup that's separate to our immediate organization. It's separate to that. If we get hit, our backup's not going to get hit. We've got something we can fall back on. It's not going to be a case of ransomware. Well, that's it. Our business is gone. Equally, we have the credibility. In the event of a ransomware attack, how are we communicating? How do we know who to tell what, how to tell them, responsibilities to regulators, etc. So I'd be looking to understand them. And then at the same time, you've got to be looking at, well, how do we protect? Because, it's good having these things in place, but ideally we want to mitigate the chance of ransomware happening. So with that in mind, I think one suggestion would be potentially looking at straight away running like a vulnerability analysis or having a penetration test. Because, the vulnerability, it's not going to be as extensive as penetration testing, but budget-wise, it's a lot cheaper. You can do it immediately. And, anything is going to come up like a Christmas tree in terms of red, you need to fix this. This is vulnerable. Your penetration test, similar, but obviously a bit more extensive, is kind of going to show you where your biggest kind of risks are. So, that helps you prioritize immediate fixes you may need to make. You might be running a server which is very out of date and there's publicly known exploits that are easy to use. That's going to find that kind of stuff. And then you can go, right, we can remediate this immediately. We can kind of get rid of the worry. But again, you've also got to be proactive. So at the same time, if we go back to our people's processes, technology, well, we're a blank canvas. We need to get the training in. We need to make people aware. They need to be aware of what the current, best practices in cybersecurity, other things they should be looking out for, how we are dealing with phishing, etc. And then, you've got your policies like we mentioned earlier. Okay, do we actually have a plan in case of an incident? Have we got our incident response plan, which, should cover kind of who is responsible for what, what are logical steps to do, what are we telling people in the event of an incident? Let's say everything goes down. Are we communicating via WhatsApp or via text? If Teams is down, how will we make sure everything's going? Other processes, how are we reporting? Do we have something in place to report? Are we leaving ourselves at risk of an employee potentially clicking a dodgy link and then not actually knowing how to report and it gets lost in emails? That then, that has time before it's found that something bad's going on and it escalates. Additionally, our suppliers, straight away you want to be looking at, okay, who is supplying to us, who has our data, what kind of data do they have, how do we know that they're keeping our data secure, because they are an extension of our security as such. We've then got our technology. It's a case of, like we mentioned earlier with the penetration testing, reviewing the current environment we have, making sure our firewalls are correct, we ensuring there's no permission creep or anything, where someone can get admin that shouldn't need to have admin. Are we keeping our networks segmented? So, our test and development, etc. That's not just open to everywhere and you can't move back and forth. Ransomware can't spread essentially. The problem is as you're probably listening to that now and you're thinking, okay, that's a ton of stuff. How do I start? Where do I start? What do I do? Where do I go? And with that, that's where I'd suggest looking at frameworks such as ISO 27001, which have got, requirements listed out, not exclusive to ransomware, but they are going to cover the ones that are relevant for ransomware. So when you're putting these in, it's mutually beneficial because one, you're increasing your cybersecurity anyway because you're applying practice. But two, if you later decide to be certified to ISO, etc., well, you've already started putting things in place. So they're not just there for the ransomware; they're there for future, certifications, etc. It doesn't need to be ISO 27001 necessarily. You've got your NIST, CSF, you've got SOC 2. But what's worth remembering is that these things are going to have a framework for you to follow. So it's not just you going pen and pencil or finger and keypad, writing down, okay, ransomware, right, let's do a mind map and do this. Well, you've already kind of got what you need to do there written for you along with guidance. So I would make use of that and then adjust as needed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about making it more manageable, isn't it? You look at all of these many different controls that you could implement to protect yourself against ransomware. And the good thing about a framework is that it just sort of lays it right there in front of you, sort of tells you what to do. Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time today, George. And for any of our listeners that want to read up a bit on this subject, we've got a blog on our website, urmconsulting.com, which is called Critical Cybersecurity Practices to Defend Against Ransomware Attacks. So go and check that out. And thank you very much for listening today. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.